friends, we will talk about the introductory part of the Understanding Popular Culture, the series which we have started today. And in the second part, I'd like to talk about the various dimensions of the popular culture. In the first part of this lecture, we talked about the various views of the scholars which are concerned with the idea of culture. And we also talked about that how high culture and the low culture, in the context of the elite culture and the popular culture, how they have been seen at different levels by the different scholars. And as I told you in the first talk, that how the various aspects which are concerned with the popular culture, they deal with the elements which are more in a way popular, or in a way which are more charming to the larger majority of people. And on the other hand, the elite culture basically will deal with a particular section of the society. And we also talked about the establishment of the various kinds of institutions by the government, and how government definitely plays in the recent times in an important role in terms of preserving and promoting the cultural heritage of the country. And we find that various kinds of offices which have been attached to the Ministry of Culture, and how these institutions and these organizations they definitely play an important role in the field of culture. And these bodies, whether the Anthropological Survey of India or National Archives, museum, libraries, academies, various kinds of academies, whether the Sangeet Natak Academy or the other kinds of academies which are concerned with literature, music, dance, for example Kathak Kendra in Delhi. So all these kinds of bodies, they are definitely playing an important role in terms of promoting these kinds of cultural fields, and at the same time disseminating information about them, teaching students, and at the same time having certain kinds of scholarships or some certain kinds of prizes, so that more and more people they get associated with the various kinds of cultural the kind of cultural heritage which is available in India. We also see that how during this particular period we are also able to locate that various kinds of support which are being given by the government at different levels. And because of this kind of support which has been provided by the government, we are able to see that all sorts of developments in the various spheres they have also taken place. And in this particular context, we are able to see that cinema, which is an important kind of cinema which has definitely played an important role, and radio definitely was also an important concern, and all these kind of developments they took place during the colonial period. And because of these developments, we also find that these developments led to this kind of a situation where we find that these kinds of mediums, whether the print media or the electronic media, both these mediums they saw some kind of a surge, and they were also able to communicate Indian culture to the audience worldwide as well. And when we talk about the Indian cinema, that how it emerged during 1895 and thereafter, when the first exhibitions they were being held in India, and in 1896 and thereafter, and the various kinds of genres which you see during this time. And one can also see that how cinema is also not only a source of entertainment, but how it is also a kind of medium which is also providing a lot of information, also education as well. And any visual medium, when it is trying to convey any kind of an idea, then we see that it is not only a medium of communication, but at the same time it is also some sort of a kind of a medium which is educating the masses as well. And how it has been used as a powerful tool in terms of guiding the students, and how students, they get enlightened on the various kinds of issues, whether the socio-economic, political, cultural, all these kinds of issues, they are in a way being communicated to the students. And we also find that as India was under the colonial rule during this particular period, and because of being a colonial country, India did not have that kind of a freedom. And we find that the various kinds of genres which developed during this particular period till 1931 during the silent cinema, and the contribution of Dada Sahab Phalke, who is considered to be the father of Indian cinema. And apart from Phalke, there are others like R.G. Torne, who is also being given credit by Firoz Rangoonwala as the first filmmaker, because his film Pundalik, which was made in 1912, came a year earlier than the Raja Harishchandra, which was made by Dada Sahab Phalke in 1913. So we find that how various kinds of genres like mythological cinema, which was made during this time, and how the mythological and the devotional films of this particular period, they were trying to communicate that how Indians, they were trying to in a way cope up with the colonial rule. And scholars like Gautam Kaul in the later times, they have argued that how the kind of insistence on truth which is being shown in Raja Harishchandra can also be related to the Satyagraha of Gandhi. And what we basically find during this period, that how Indian cinema developed during the national movement, and how it was in a way influenced by the national movement, and also the national movement influenced the Hindi cinema or the Indian cinema as well. So this kind of an interaction which took place during the colonial period, where cinema was getting influenced, and at the same time the national movement was also getting influenced by cinema as well. And we find that how films, they can also be seen as cultural products, because films, they are trying to communicate the kind of culture which is associated with those individuals. And when these moving images, they are shown to the audience in different parts of the country or maybe other countries as well, then film, definitely they are basically seen as some sort of a cultural product. And during the colonial period, when we try to associate the national movement, how it was connected with the cinema, and the various genres, they were being also in a way understood by the people. As I told you in the context of Raja Harishchandra, that how philosophy of Satyagraha was in a way seen to be in some sort of a parallel of the philosophy of Raja Harishchandra. And there were other themes apart from the mythologicals and the devotionals which were seen. And even in the devotional films, we find that the kind of ideas which were propagated by the different saints or the saint poets, they were talking about a kind of society which was to have some kind of a tolerance for each other. They were talking about the ideas of equality, they were talking about the ideas of freedom. So all these kinds of things, they were being talked in the devotional films. And we also find that some of the films which were dealing with the ideas of history, and they could be seen in a framework of the historical. And one of the films was Sikandar, which was released during the Second World War. And at that point of time, the Second World War was at its peak. And there was a lot of the kind of political atmosphere which was there in India. It was also very tense, and Mahatma Gandhi gave a call for the Quit India movement. And in this particular kind of an atmosphere, we find that how this film was able to arouse the patriotic feeling and the national sentiments, and how this film was censored, and then it was not being allowed to be screened in many of the military cantonment areas. And the way audience received it could also be related in the context that when Porus talks about driving out the aliens from Bharatvarsh, it could also be understood as a reference to the British. So we see that the various kinds of films which were made during this period with different kinds of themes, they were in a way trying to communicate the ideals of the national movement in one way or another. For example, not only mythologicals and devotionals, historicals and biographicals, but at the same time the stunt cinema was also trying to position the national movement, and the makers of the stunt films, they in a way communicated that the kind of characters which they used, the kind of language which they used in their films, they were trying to position them in such a manner where even if there was a story of a king or a queen and the descendants of the king and the queen, then the questions of legitimacy and illegitimacy, they were being shown, that how the kingdom of that particular king or a queen was taken away by some illegitimate person. In the similar fashion, the way British, they had taken control over India. We also find that various films which were dealing with the ideas of social reform, they were also being made during this time, and many of the commercial films like Kismat, where there was a song called Aaj Himalay ki choti se fir humne lalkara hai. So all of them, they were trying to communicate these kinds of ideas, that how the ideals of the national movement, they could be shown in the cinema as well. We also find that after independence of cinema, after independence of India, the kind of cinema which was being made, it was dealing with the idea of nation building, and these kinds of films, they were, for example, Sujata was dealing with the issue of untouchability and how to resolve this issue in the context of the nation building. Similarly, the issues of class, they were being raised in a film called Devdas, and the issue of depeasantization could be seen in a film called Do Biga Zameen, which was directed by Bimal Roy. So Bimal Roy directed all these three films, and the different kinds of ideas which were the ideas of nation building, they could be seen in this kind of a cinema. We also find films like Naya Daur and Paigam, and both these films, they were again dealing with the idea of how to build a nation. And as you can see on the screen as well, the idealized nationalism of 1950s could be seen in these films, and the idea of manual labor versus mechanization could be seen in Naya Daur, and the conflict between the capital versus the labor, industrial workers' rights, for example, it could be seen in Paigam. And this was the period of 1950s, when nation had just became independent in 1947, and there was a lot of confusion with regard to what kind of path which the nation should take, whether one should go for any kind of a capitalist development or whether one should go for the socialist kind of a development. And the issue of mixed economy, which we see during this period, was trying to bring some kind of a balance to the economy. It was trying to bring a kind of a balance not only in the economic sector but in the other sectors of India. We also find the 1970s was a period where you find disillusionment and the anti-establishment mood. And 1970s and the 80s, we find there was a lot of questioning during this time, and the angry young man image of Amitabh Bachchan became popular during this particular period, and this idea of anti-establishment in the 1970s became quite popular. Then we also find that in 1980s we find that some kind of a middle cinema, or the kind of films which were dealing with other kinds of issues. In 1970s as well, we find that the parallel cinema movement, it began in a way with the Nouvelle Vague or the New Wave cinema of 1969 with Bhuvan Shom, and in 1970s also we find the parallel cinema as well. But in 1980s, there were other films which were being made in the context of the parallel cinema, and at the same time we also see that the middle class cinema of Rishikesh Mukherjee, Golmaal, Anand, Bawarchi, Khoobsurat, all these kinds of films, they were being made. And parallel cinema was dealing with the issue of meaningful cinema on the socio-economic issues. And Shyam Benegal, Govind Nihalani, etc., they were in a way the harbingers of the parallel cinema. Thereafter, in 1990s, we find that there were a lot of changes in the exhibition and in terms of production as well as the distribution of films, and the coming of the multiplexes, the coming of the big studios and big budgeted films. And at the same time we also find that smaller films with some kind of a target audience, all of them, they were there. And we also find that developments in the framework of television could be seen, where you find Doordarshan programming, and how 1980s a number of serials, they became popular. And particularly in 1990s we find the arrival of the cable television, and then DTH, direct to home, and then we find television on the mobile screen as well. And how 1983 victory of India in the World Cup, we find that cricket became very popular, and how cinema and cricket, they became some sort of two areas which are of a lot of interest to the Indians. And the people, those who entered any of them, they became not only popular, but they were able to have some kind of a social mobility, and at the same time they were able to secure their future in the financial sphere as well, if they were able to invest in a wiser manner. So we find that how the coming of television, it in a way culturally, from that point of view, it became some kind of a tool for the increasing global integration, and how it shrank the world to the dimensions of a global village, because various kinds of channels which are dealing with the different themes, and how they are available 24/7 nowadays. And because of which we find that how television is there in every house from that point of view. And we also find that how the entertainment program, they play an important role in terms of being some sort of a catharsis to the masses. And at the same time we also have to realize the negative effects of television, where undesirable levels of sex and violence, they have some kind of an impression of the young impressionistic minds. We also find the arrival of the direct to home or the DTH, where we will find that this kind of a proliferation of this technology, where you will find that the dish antenna is available at every nook and corner of the country, and where cable television could not reach, we find that DTH could reach easily, and it was operating directly through the satellite. So all these kinds of developments, especially in the 90s and thereafter, they brought a lot of changes in the programming as well. And we also find that how the arrival of the internet, it also played an important role, and the issue of instant messaging and the internet forums and the social networking. So it in a way played an important role in reshaping the culture. And the coming of the emails and the Skype, Yahoo Messenger, etc., it in a way shortened the distances between people, those who were sitting even in two different continents. And we also find that how educational material at all levels, virtual universities and internet tuitions, they also have opened the new vistas in teaching and learning processes. So all these kinds of developments in the technology, in the framework of internet, they definitely have played an important role. That how technology has in a way shortened the distances between two people, or the various people which have this kind of a particular technology available with them. And we also find that a lot of information is available to the people on these internet channels or internet as well, where one can in a way access a lot of information. And we also find that how social media or the social networking media is a popular media which has brought great changes in terms of sending and receiving the messages as well. So from that point of view, social media has definitely played an important role, and the positive sides and the negative sides of social media, they have been talked about at different levels. And but at the same time, one has to realize that how social media has in a way created that kind of a communication level where few to numerous communication can be done, and because of which we also find that over a period of time developments have led to numerous communication. And the arrival of the smartphones and the arrival of the sleek smartphones with the kind of technology which is rapidly expanding every day, all of it has in a way made things comparatively easier for the people, and at the same time difficult in the context that people are more engaged in these kinds of media, and the earlier modes of entertainment and earlier activities, they are not being in a way given that kind of importance which is being needed. So social media has both and the mobile technology has both positives as well as negatives which are attached to it. We also find that all these kinds of medias which are available to us, in a way they have in a way created that kind of a society and the kind of a media which is considered to be an egalitarian media, and where anyone can communicate to the world, and instantaneous response is likely on the social networking media. So these kinds of developments have in a way made the world as some kind of a global village, as has been talked about, the arrival of internet and the other kinds of developments which have taken place, which has brought some kind of an information revolution, and people have that kind of an access in their own hands because these people because of availability of the various social networking sites, the availability of internet in their own mobile phones, because of which they are not able to have the kind of information which they could not secure earlier, because earlier they had to go to some kind of a machine where the computer to access the information. But the availability of the mobile phone has in a way created the kind of a situation where people can access the information at a very short interval. And many times we see that how the communication specialists, they see the deficiency of gatekeeping as a problem which challenges the reliability of the social media, because many times we have seen that how in the different kinds of webinars etc which are happening, or the meetings which are happening, and how the unwanted elements, they many a times enter these meetings or even sometimes classroom teaching and create the kind of a nonsense. So this kind of a deficiency with regard to the gatekeeping is a problem, and many a times what one has to see in this particular sphere is to have more and more kind of cautious approach where this kind of a crashing shall not take place. And we also find that the social networking sites like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc., and the various kinds of blogging sites like Blogger and WordPress, all these kinds of things which are available to the masses at just a click of a fingertip that way. And we also find that the social media applications like WhatsApp, all of them, they are examples of the social networking media. So to conclude the lecture, I like to suggest that how the changes in the various spheres in the context of the development of the technology has brought about far-reaching changes, especially in the 21st century. And the way cinema, television and the social media, they have evolved over a period of time. Many things, they were unimaginable especially in the 20th century. But over a period of time, how generations they are keeping pace with these kinds of changes, and I believe and expect that more changes they will be seen in the recent times. So thank you very much.